Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Tonight is the first preseason game, Timberwolves versus Pelicans from Target Center. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, but also focus on three major X factors for the Timberwolves this season. One is a player. The others are aspects of the team that we can look forward to this year that could be the difference between squeaking into the playoffs and solidly making the playoffs, or maybe covering potential injuries this year and just being a playoff team no matter what. We're going to talk about all that on the show here today. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked on Wolves. My name is Ben Beacon. I am the host of Locked on Wolves. I'm also the editor of Dunking with Wolves, the Timberwolves site on the Fansided Network. Just a reminder, first thing here off the top, or actually a thank you for making Locked on Wolves your first listen every single day. We are free and available on all platforms. Happy Monday, everybody. Happy first day of the week and happy start of the preseason and real live Timberwolves basketball for the first time since May. We're going to talk briefly about the preseason here today. I want to cover that obviously more in the week. Tuesday will be a full-blown post-game podcast following the Wolves preseason game on Monday evening against the Pelicans. Today, though, I want to focus on X factors throughout the team, throughout the roster, the things that are different about this team this year that could lead to market improvement on the 2021-22 version of the Timberwolves. Before we get to all that, though, a quick reminder that you can follow this podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. That includes Apple, Google, Spotify, the all-new Odyssey app. Of course, now YouTube. We're 6 weeks into this thing on YouTube, so be sure if you're not already subscribed, if you're not following there, please do. And if you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like button below. That definitely helps us grow the channel as it is still a new one. You can also follow on Twitter at LockedOnTWolves and at BBeacon with 2 B's, 2 E's, CK. Yeah, and again, thanks for making Locked on Wolves your first listen every day. Again, free and available on all platforms. Okay, the preseason starts tonight. That's Wolves Pelicans from Target Center, 7 p.m. Central. The game is actually being broadcast on Bally Sports North. Each of the first 2 Wolves games this preseason will be on Bally Sports North and presumably on NBA League Pass as well. All 4 preseason games broadcast on 830 WCCO in the Twin Cities with the fantastic Alan Horton. And of course, the wonderful Dave Benz and Jim Peterson will still be broadcasting Wolves games on Bally Sports North. The next preseason game is Friday, October 8th against the Nuggets, and that's on the road in Denver. The following game, the third preseason game, and remember, this is we talked about the preseason schedule when it came out several weeks ago. The third preseason game is Monday, also on the road. Of the 4 preseason games, only one is at Target Center. So on Monday, they're in Los Angeles to take on the Clippers. That's Monday the 11th. That's a late game, and it will be apparently on NBA TV. On Thursday, the Timberwolves will take on the Brooklyn Nets. That's also on NBA TV. That's next Thursday, the 14th, 6:30 p.m. Central, and that game will also be NBA TV. So the first 2 preseason games, Monday, Friday on Bally Sports North, and next Monday and Thursday on NBA TV. So all 4 Timberwolves preseason games will be broadcast one way or another, so you'll be able to enjoy preseason hoops. Wolves Pelicans Monday. As of now, the Wolves PR tweeted out on Sunday that there are no injuries on the Timberwolves, no injuries to report. Presumably, that means Karl-Anthony Towns will play. We had seen last week that he was ramping up in training camp, wasn't really taking part in 5-on-5 live scrimmage drills, the portions available, open and available to the media. But the Wolves said, Chris Finch said they were ramping him up for Monday's preseason opener. So presumably he will start and play some minutes on Monday. I'm sure not a whole lot, and nor should he. So we should see a full-strength Wolves team. Very curious to see how the minutes are divvied up here as we move through the preseason, and obviously more so in the regular season. I don't really want to cover preseason keys to watch today because it's really tough to say. We just don't know what the Wolves are going to trot out there in terms of a lineup or rotation, minutes limits, what they're going to try and get done, how vanilla all their stuff will be on both ends of the floor in the preseason, especially game 1. So I want to see the first preseason game and maybe even the second, to really kind of say like, hey, what should we be watching for? Now, I think after the first one, again, we'll do a full post-game podcast on Tuesday, which is admittedly a little bit of a silly exercise in that, like I said, we don't know exactly what to expect, and it's not going to be the full Timberwolves, offense or defense that we will see moving forward. But I want to do a post-game pod Tuesday that'll kind of direct the rest of the week and what we can look forward to in the rest of the preseason, and we'll go from there. Today on the show, though, I do want to mostly talk about X factors. I wrote a piece at Dunking with Wolves about 3 X factors that I think the Timberwolves will be relying on this year to, I think, as a whole, these 3 things, one's a player specifically, an individual. The other 2 are can be assigned to a couple 3 individuals on the team, but they're more traits of the team or areas that they've improved or should have improved this year. Presumably, they've improved, um, and each of those things together, I think you could either take this team from a fringe, play-in team, the 10th seed, or the 11th, just missing out. Hopefully not 9th, 10th, 11th, somewhere in there, to like 6th, which would take them out of the play-in conversation, or 7th, in which case they would host a play-in game and have some advantage there in the way that the play-in works. So I think that these are going to be, I guess that's kind of the definition of an X factor, right? The thing that kind of is that fringe plus that helps the team take the next step. Obviously, this season is going to be all about Karl-Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, and to a little bit of a lesser extent, D'Angelo Russell. Can Cat bounce back from injuries and illness the last 2 years and be the Cat we know he can be when healthy? I think the answer to that is very likely yes. So the bigger question is, can he stay healthy? As of course he did the first 4 years in the league. He, I think, missed 1 game in his first 4 seasons. And Anthony Edwards, can he continue to improve? Can D'Angelo Russell improve a little bit defensively? If those guys each play to their capabilities, this is a playoff team. There's no question about that. But it's those other pieces, the fringe pieces, the X factors, if you will, that will take this team from squeaking into the playoffs at 9 or 10 into the play-in portion of the playoffs and being a solid playoff team and not, biting our nails down to the game 82 to just squeak into the play-in round. What could make the difference on this year's team? So that's what I want to focus on today's show. We're going to get into that here in just a minute. First, though, it's football season, and that means we have to talk about Sleeper, which isn't just a fantasy football site. I use it for dynasty fantasy football, but it's also now they've been doing fantasy basketball for a while, but they've changed things up, and they're fantastic. The way that they operate fantasy basketball in 2018. The fantasy sports experts at Sleeper realized that fantasy basketball was broken. Games were being won and lost based on whose players had more scheduled games that week. It made no sense at all and required very little strategy. So in 2020, Sleeper released a brand new way of playing fantasy basketball. It's called Game Pick, and it's only available on Sleeper. In Game Pick, owners pick a single game per week for each starter to count towards their team's total score, ensuring an even number of games played between opponents. The days of losing because your opponent's players simply had more scheduled games to play that week are over. The days of mindless daily busy work are also over, and the days of giving up halfway through the season because of said busy work, they're also definitely over. In Game Picks, you pick 1 game per week for each player based on player matchups, home versus away, opponent's defensive ranking, pace of play, and more. All of that adds up to more strategy and less busy work. Whether you prefer redraft, keeper, or dynasty, Game Picks has you covered. Sleeper cracked the fantasy basketball code. If you love playing fantasy football, which, by the way, again, I do on Sleeper, if you prefer building out a weekly strategy versus daily busy work, you're going to love Game Picks. Download the Sleeper app and start a league with your friends today. You will not be disappointed. Also, along similar lines, it's football season. So, of course, you're no doubt watching DirecTV. But does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone, and perhaps you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for the good stuff. Well, I want to show you about a simple way to get all that entertainment that you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. The best part? There's no annual contract. Get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. Okay, let's go ahead and get into these X factors for the Timberwolves this year. All right. And actually, before we do that, one more thank you again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Again, free and available on all platforms. Don't forget, that's true of all Locked On shows as well, including YouTube. All right. So in terms of these X factors, first of all, let's talk about Leandro Bolmaro. And he's the only one on this list that is just simply a player that is an X factor, because I think that can get really overblown. And just speaking generally about the term X factor, it's really easy just to kind of build a narrative around, oh, this is the player who's not a star that will make a difference. But I mean, it's always seemed kind of silly to me in general, in any sport, because it's like the team was constructed in a certain way. to have these guys who are supposed to be X factors, but that's the plan, right? The plan isn't that some guy's going to step up and surprisingly be really good, because otherwise they wouldn't be on the team in the first place. So two of my three X factors are more concepts than they are specific players. But I want to talk about Bolmaro. And we spent some time talking about him on the show before. We did a whole show all about Bolmaro back in, I think this was mid-July, because it would have been between the draft and the Olympics, the Tokyo Olympics. I had Jake Painting of formerly Kane Supis. He's got his own Substack now. So check out Jake Painting on Twitter. If you're not already following him or subscribe to his stuff, he does a fantastic job. But he had a lot to say about Bolmaro. He kind of became the Bolmaro whisperer, is maybe not the right term, the Bolmaro expert, I guess, in any case, this summer. And he came on the show. We talked about what Bolmaro could bring to the Wolves. And the biggest thing, I think, is defense. The Timberwolves obviously have been a bad defensive team for several years. They've been bottom 10 basically every year except for the Jimmy Butler season. And they were still pretty middle of the pack that year too, because of some of the other issues they had beyond Butler and Taj Gibson, some of the defensive issues they had. They were playing Jamal Crawford and Jeff Teague heavy minutes, and obviously Towns wasn't great defensively. The Wolves just have not been a good defensive team really since Kevin Garnett was here in his prime, which is sad, but true. And Bolmaro is a top flight pick and roll defender. He can defend really any pick and roll concept well. He's athletic enough. He's really big. His size, his length, his anticipation. And the biggest thing is how hard he plays, which is obviously something that I guess can't be coached, right? It can't be taught. You either have it or you don't. You're going to play hard or you're not. And Bolmaro combines the good size and the good instincts and the intelligence with the willingness to play hard, the stick-to-itiveness, if you will, in the pick and roll game. And so he can guard, he can get over screens well, he can fight through screens extremely well, which is something that D'Angelo Russell has struggled with more due to effort than anything else. Jordan McLaughlin struggles with because of his size more than anything else. Rubio struggled with last year because he lost a half a step or more after the COVID-19 battle and reporting a little bit out of shape, as a lot of people did. But Rubio wasn't great defending in the pick and roll or fighting through screens last year as he had been early in his career. That's something that Patrick Beverley, who of course is coming off the bench now for the Wolves, will bring to the table. Bolmaro is very good at it, and he's big. He's more a point forward than he is a guard. He's not a guard. He's a forward, right? But he operates more as a point forward on both ends, or I should say offensively. But defensively, he can guard multiple positions. And that's the first thing. Point of attack defense, pick and roll defense. And I wrote about this and talked about it on the show last year after they drafted him. His floor is already kind of a rotation player because he's such a solid defender. He's a decent rebounder. He's a great passer and playmaker. He was one of the best playmakers in the draft last year and would have been this year as well had he waited a year before entering the draft. And the only real knock on him was moderate athleticism, and the shot looked funky, and he hadn't really made a ton of threes. Now this year, over 63 games for a couple different teams in Europe, and almost half of that coming in EuroLeague, he made 41% of his three-point attempts. And that was, again, across 63 games in Europe, 41% after not having much of a track record of making threes. We don't know if that was a little bit fluky, and obviously things change quite a bit when you go from Europe to the NBA. So I'm not expecting him to be a 40% three-point shooter in the NBA, and nobody should. But if he can be average, if he can shoot 34% from three and not, allow defenses to simply leave him alone when he's got the ball in his hands, that could be a boon to the Timberwolves offense when he's on the floor. He's going to be able to play defense at the NBA level immediately. I truly believe that. The question is, what can he do offensively to be able to keep himself on the floor? If he can compete defensively as we think he can, then he's just got to do a little bit on offense to stay on the floor. The problem for him is going to be fighting for minutes, honestly. I mean, you look at the Timberwolves, we'll call it top 9. He's probably not in the top 9 as currently constructed, because you're talking the starters, and we'll, for argument's sake, we'll say it's D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, Anthony Edwards. I'll say Jared Vanderbilt because I still think he's going to start, and Karl-Anthony Towns. So your sixth man is basically Jaden McDaniels. You've got Patrick Beverley, who's definitely in the rotation. Naz Reid's your backup center. That's 8. Now you're looking, who is it? Is it Josh Okogie, or is it Leandro Bolmaro as your 9th guy? And whoever's not 9th is then probably 10th. And you're still not including Jordan McLaughlin in that top 10. He becomes 11. And then after that, you're looking at Jake Layman, some of the two-way guys that's going to be your 12th, 13th guys. But who gets that 9th spot in the rotation? Is it Okogie or is it Bolmaro? My bet's on Okogie at the start of the season, but Bolmaro by the end of the season. And it wouldn't shock me if Bolmaro slides up the depth chart a little bit further. The Wolves just find him ways to get on the court. But you look at the other guys he's got to fight through, all those wings. And then also, I mean, how often is, Edwards, Beasley, Jaden McDaniels is going to be playing a lot more three this year. Josh Okogie wants minutes on the wing. Russell and Patrick Beverley are going to probably play some minutes together, throw McLaughlin in that mix. If Chris Finch wants to play more 2 point guard backcourts, McLaughlin could get some opportunities, especially if there's foul trouble or injuries early in the season. So Bolmaro's biggest thing is going to be fighting for minutes, but he's got a ceiling. I think he legitimately has a star caliber ceiling. It's obviously not likely he reaches it, but his floor is already rotation player, and his most likely case scenario is as a plus starter, right? As an above average starter in the NBA with legit star potential, depending on how quickly he adapts and if his shot actually sticks. If he becomes dangerous enough, an upper 30% 3-point shooter, then he could be a star in this league. This year, whatever he's able to provide as the 9th, 8th, 7th man off the bench, or I should say 9th, 8th, 7th man in the rotation, that's going to be huge for the Timberwolves. And it could be one of the big differences between fringe playoff team and solid impact or solid, I guess, an impact playoff team, somebody who's a team that's out of the play-in conversation and into maybe the 6th seed or something like that in the West. He could be one of those factors. The second thing I want to talk about is Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards and their rebounding capabilities. This is an X factor because it's something that wasn't very good last year. And obviously Bolmaro wasn't on the team last year, so that's why he can be an X factor this year. McDaniels and Edwards did not rebound the ball well last season. And if they do rebound up to their physical capabilities and what the Wolves expect of them and the positions that they'll be playing, then that's going to make a really big difference. The defense grabs the headlines as the thing that's been really terrible for the Wolves in recent years, but go and look at their team rebounding numbers, whether that's defensive rebound percentage or rebounds per game. Rebounds per game is misleading because that's not pace adjusted, and the Wolves have scored a ton and allowed a ton of points. So there's just more possessions, which means more rebounds available in past seasons. So rebound percentage is the best way to look at it. And the Wolves have been awful rebounding the ball. Part of that was due to, Towns missing time the last couple of years. Part of it's due to Ryan Saunders playing a lot of small ball. Robert Covington played in the 4. Some of these different, Josh Okogie played in the 4 early last year. But the other part of it is they haven't had guys that really rebound their position well. And I'm not necessarily, D'Angelo Russell's a fine rebounder for his position. Rubio was a fine rebounder for his position. Naz Reid is a good rebounder at the 4, but at the 5, he struggled. And I don't want to make this about Naz necessarily, but that's part of it. Naz has to rebound at the backup 5 better than he did last year, especially when Towns was out. He struggled. But let's talk about McDaniels first. He was 6'8-ish, 6'9 maybe last year. He's a solid 6'10 this year, reportedly. He's got a 7-foot wingspan. He's grown an inch and a half in the offseason, and he's an above average athlete. McDaniels should be a good rebounder. Now, of course, his build isn't great. He gets compared to everyone from Brandon Ingram to Kevin Durant, or he did, I should say, really coming out of college, because he has a slight frame and a slight build. He's apparently added a little bit of muscle and a little bit of weight going into this year, and should be a little bit more used to the physicality of the NBA game versus playing in the Pac-12. And the other thing is he played a lot of 4 early last year, and he wasn't ready to rebound the ball, to box out NBA caliber athletes and NBA caliber bodies as a rookie at the 4. But he's going to play a ton of 3 under Chris Finch. I bet he'll play 3/4 of his minutes at the 3, if not more. And his athleticism, size, length, instincts, and his build will play better at the 3 than it does at the 4. And so if McDaniels rebounds at the 3, like we think he can, that's going to be outstanding. He's going to be a good rebounding 3. And recently there was, I think Dane Moore tweeted this out. It was a quote from Chris Finch after practice recently at training camp about McDaniels' defense and his rebounding, saying that he didn't get as many defensive rebounds last year because he was often guarding higher usage ball handlers on the perimeter a ways away from the hoop. But Finch followed that up by saying that they expect McDaniels to improve because of his instincts. He's got to grab his share of weak side rebounds when possible. He's got to. I mean, you think about that, 1, maybe 2 possessions a game. If McDaniels can cut it short for the opposing team by grabbing a weak side rebound, that's huge. I mean, how many games are decided by 1 or 2 possessions? And over the course of a season, that's going to make a really big difference. In terms of rebound rate, last year McDaniels only had a rebound rate of 8.3%. That was 7th on the Wolves roster. It was behind, behind Jarrett Culver. It was barely ahead of Malik Beasley. About a percentage point and a half ahead of Ricky Rubio in terms of rebound percentage. It's not what they wanted to see out of McDaniels. But if he could just, be a little bit better, and again, as Finch said, rebound the weak side a little bit better, that would be great. As for Edwards, Anthony Edwards apparently also grew from 6'4" to 6'6" this offseason. He's going to be playing a lot more three, and Finch has already said he could play some small ball four as well. And he also talked in an interview in August, I think this was at the Minnesota State Fair with Chris Hine of the Star Tribune. Finch said there was a game last year where they challenged Edwards, hey, get 7 rebounds, and he got exactly 7 rebounds. And if they challenge him to rebound the ball more, plus he's grown, plus he's athletic, plus his instincts continue to improve as he gets used to the NBA game, if he could up that rebound percentage slightly with his insane athleticism, his height, his length, his instincts, more opportunities, then he is going to, that's going to make a big difference to the Timberwolves. And the other thing that gets overlooked, and I've gotten on my soapbox about this before on the show, but rebounding is directly related to defense. And it's one of the reasons why defensive rebounding is such a high, it's a metric considered highly in many of the advanced metrics that are out there, right? Like win shares, for instance, on Basketball Reference, heavily weights rebounding. Why? Because rebounding, by definition, an offensive possession can't end without a made shot, a missed shot, which then equals a rebound, or a turnover, right? There could be a foul, but then that's still ending in a shot at the free throw line, right? Or a rebound on a missed free throw. So the only ways you can end a possession are by allowing them to score, by getting them to turn the ball over, or by rebounding a miss. And so by definition, it's defense. Rebounding is defense. It's ending the opposing team's possession. And so if Edwards and McDaniels can continue to improve their defensive rebounding, it's going to make a world of a difference for the Timberwolves in terms of their defense, and then in turn, obviously impact winning directly. If they can stop teams from scoring, they're going to win more games, obviously. And Edwards and McDaniels are going to have a huge hand in that. So number 1 X factor, Leandro Bolmaro. Number 2, and these aren't really in any particular order. Number 2 is rebounding, and specifically defensive rebounding from Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels. There's one more that I want to get to on today's show. We're going to do that here in just a second. First, though, let's talk about our great friends over at Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar of all time. It tastes exactly like a candy bar. I kid you not. They are delicious. There's several outstanding flavors, anything with coconut, anything with caramel, mint brownie, cookies and cream, all fantastic. If you haven't tried all the flavors or any flavors, you need to get a mix box. You'll get 2 of each of the 9 main flavors. Check out the macros in Built Bars. Not only are they delicious, but they're absolutely healthy for you. 17 to 18 grams of protein per bar and calories ranging from only 130 per bar to 180 per bar. Only 4 to 5 grams of sugar and only 4 or 5 grams net carbs in each bar. Amazing flavors, are all tasty and all healthy. Built Bar is the official protein bar of the U.S. track and field team. Go to Built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Okay, let's talk about the final X factor on my list for the Timberwolves this season. And again, number 1 is Leandro Bolmaro. Number 2 is rebounding, specifically from Edwards and McDaniels. Number 3 is improved roster depth. And this is something I talked about a couple of weeks ago on the show. This Timberwolves team is a lot deeper than really any Timberwolves team in recent memory. Maybe the playoff team in 18 with Butler. That team was fairly deep, but it was, it was kind of, it was fringy depth, but I think it was a deep enough team, right? I mean, they were a playoff team. They kind of weathered the storm after the Butler injury. Remember, Jeff Teague, I think, hurt his meniscus that year and missed a handful of games, or sprained his knee maybe around Christmas time and missed 3-4 weeks. There was enough depth on that team that they were able to get by. This is clearly the next best, if not a slightly better team in terms of depth. Here's the best example of it. Josh Okogie last year started 37 of the 59 games in which he played. For his career with the Wolves over the last 3 years, which, by the way, it's crazy that he's only been with the Wolves for 3 years. It feels like forever that Josh has been on the team. He started in 117 of his 195 games in a Timberwolves uniform. Josh Okogie is not, I love Josh Okogie. I think he's outstanding. He's not a starting caliber player in a playoff NBA team in the year 2021 or 2022. He just isn't. Maybe a spot starter, filling in here and there. And I think he's a rotation player, but he's more of a fringe rotation, 10, 12, 14, 16 minutes a game, give you a boost of energy, be a second line defender to come in and guard, if they're taking on a high usage wing who's really good, to come in and help spell, I guess early in the season, Jaden McDaniels, hopefully eventually Edwards improves defensively, so he's your first option, or to spell Leandro Bolmaro. But Okogie is not a guy who should be getting 26 minutes a game or starting. And now, as I talked about earlier in the show, he's probably your 8th, 9th, maybe even your 10th guy. And that's the role he should be in. That's the best case role for Josh Okogie. He can play some three. He can play four offensively, kind of hide him in the dunker spot, but he can lock down on defense. If he does enough offensively, and maybe he starts making his corner threes, which at this point would be a minor miracle, and then he rises very quickly if he becomes somewhat dangerous on offense. He's also a good cutter, and that makes him valuable too. So he's probably best cast as a ninth man and a fringe guy on like a playoff rotation. If the Wolves go to the playoffs, probably Josh Okogie's not in the regular playoff rotation. Bolmaro is probably your eighth guy, and Okogie's probably your ninth guy or something like that once you get it to the playoffs. So that's one good example. Another is Jake Layman. Now, Layman was never expected to be a starter. He started a handful of games the last 2 years, but he was effectively the team's sixth man in the fall of 2019, right after he came over to the Wolves initially as a sign and trade acquisition from Portland. He was the sixth man. He led the team in minutes off the bench in like 6 of the first 7 games in 2019. Now, the Wolves got off to a good start that season, and then Layman got hurt. And obviously, injuries have been a theme for Layman and his time in Minnesota, unfortunately. But even the best version of Jake Layman should not be like your 6th or 7th man. He should be your depth guy, right? He should be your 9th, 10th, ideally 11th guy who can come in because of foul trouble, who can step in for a game or two if there's a minor injury, be a good cutter, be a decent 3-point shooter, be a solid team defender, but he's not a lockdown one-on-one guy. He's not a sharpshooter. He's obviously very athletic and long. There's things he does well. He's one of the best cutters on the roster. And so those things are all valuable, but you can't overexpose the guys who should be 10th or 11th on your roster, like a Layman, or 8th or 9th, like a guy like a Okogie. Those guys are now in the roles that they should be in. The starting lineup's going to have Beasley, Edwards, and either McDaniels or Vanderbilt. You're going to have Bolmaro and Beverly off the bench. These are all guys, and again, we're projecting a little with Bolmaro, but take him out of it. There's still enough guys now where Okogie's your 9th guy, right? I mean, you're not relying too much on Josh Okogie. You're not relying at all on Jake Layman as long as you're healthy and the team, as long as you're not having major foul trouble in any given game. And that's how things should look for a Jake Layman or for a Josh Okogie. Those are the best examples. And also the Wolves theoretically now should not be relying on two-way guys this year. Nathan Knight and McKinley Wright. I hope they get the opportunity to play, but I hope it's because the Wolves are up in garbage time in games or whatever. But they shouldn't be pressed into duty like McLaughlin was. And that was obviously partly due to injury. A couple of years ago, McLaughlin was, and we saw it, I guess, a little bit less last year. But those two-way slots, you don't want guys that you're going to have to rely on throughout the season. And the Wolves now have the depth where they should not have to do that. And I think that's really, really big. It's kind of like you hear about the difference between going from bad to decent, or the difference from going good to great. It's a similar leap. And in this case, the Wolves, obviously their defense has been bad, but if you look at the depth, if the depth goes from not good at all to kind of average depth to a slightly above average depth, that's a huge jump. If you take out the Jake Layman minutes and the, insert, a couple of years ago, you look at Travion Graham or end of his career, Shabazz Napier, or all these guys, Jordan Bell, players who are now playing overseas or in the G League. And you replace them with legitimate NBA players like an up-and-coming Naz Reid. Haven't even talked about Jalen Noel. He's probably your 10th or 11th guy. I completely forgot about him earlier. And I think he's a potential sixth man. I mean, he's not there yet. He's not great defensively. But there's real depth on this team, I guess, is the point. You're replacing those minutes from these guys who aren't in the league any longer with up-and-coming guys like Naz Reid, Jalen Noel, veterans like Patrick Beverly, a rookie like Leandro Bolmaro, who's very promising. And then Okogie's kind of your guy who kind of has a foot in each camp, right? I mean, he's not a super grizzled veteran, but he's got a little bit of experience in the league. You know what he can do. It's a team that has a lot of things. If that makes sense. They've got some depth. They've got some quite a bit of youth, and they've got a couple of veteran type guys. And that all kind of factors into depth. And I think the Wolves did a really good job of that from a front office perspective, improving this roster. And again, it hasn't been splashy, and perhaps there's a Ben Simmons trade at some point. Who knows? It hasn't been a splashy offseason. And outside of the Russell deal, and I guess you could say the Beasley Hernan Gomez deal, not super splashy in the past couple of years either. But the Wolves have slowly but surely improved the roster 1 through 12, 1 through 13. It's a lot better now than it was 2 years ago. It just is. So anyway, those are the 3 X factors for this year: Bolmaro, defensive rebounding, specifically McDaniels and Edwards, and then the overall depth on the roster. Those are things that are going to play out over the course of the season. Again, I don't expect Bolmaro to be a huge factor in the rotation early this season, but eventually he will be. And the depth thing may not be obvious right away either, although the 7th and 8th guys on the team are better already because of it. But over the course of a long season, that's going to play itself out even more. So we can revisit this here in a few weeks or months, or maybe at the end of the season when we're looking back on hopefully a playoff run for the Timberwolves. But those are the X factors. Tonight is the preseason opener. We'll have a post-game podcast that posts probably late Monday leading into early Tuesday. We'll go ahead and just because it's been so long, we'll do studs and duds, key takeaways from the game and highlights from the game, the biggest moments in the game, which again feels a little silly for preseason, but not entirely silly because let's face it, it's real Timberwolves basketball. And well, I guess not fully real, but mostly real Timberwolves basketball. And we expect the majority of the players on the roster to play. So we're going to talk all about that on the postgame pod on Tuesday. So be sure, if you're not already following or subscribed to the show, that you do that. Again, thanks for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. And remember, free and available everywhere on all platforms, including YouTube, as well as Apple, Google, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at BBeacon with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Reminder that Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Podcast Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. We'll be back again tomorrow on Tuesday. A reminder, we're daily again, Monday through Friday. So be sure you're subscribed wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beacon. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.